All right, let's get right into it. When you think about Tesla today, you see this absolute giant, right? But what's crazy is that their journey, their rise to the top, it wasn't just some lucky break. Not at all. It was a planned, calculated rebellion against an industry that hadn't changed in 100 years. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and unpack that exact blueprint.
So this is really the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, how does a company that is literally weeks away from just disappearing not only survive, but turn around and rewrite all the rules for the entire global car market? It seems impossible, but the answer, as we're about to see, is just a masterclass in strategy.
And I really want you to get how bad things were. We're talking late 2008. The whole world's financial system is melting down. Money has just vanished. And Tesla? They've got basically no cash left in the bank. The whole dream, the whole project, it was this close to being over. Okay, so to understand how they managed to pull back from the very edge of that cliff, we've got to look at their... And this was a decision that just flew in the face of all the so-called expert advice. It was a massive gamble.
You know, for decades, the playbook in the car industry was set in stone. It was simple. You start with a cheap, mass-market car, sell a ton of them, and then maybe, just maybe, you eventually try to build a fancier luxury car. Tesla looked at that rulebook and just torched it. They flipped the whole thing upside down and started right at the very, very top. And here's why that's so important. The Roadster wasn't really just a car. Think of it more like a strategic weapon. Its real mission, it wasn't to sell 1 million of them. Nope. It was to prove one single thing, that electric cars could be cool, that they could be fast and beautiful and something people would actually want. That one move established the Tesla brand as this premium, cutting-edge company. And here's the kicker. The money they made was just the seed funding for the real master plan. So that first big gambit, the Roadster, it slots perfectly into the next piece of this puzzle. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty, the actual operational plan that would let them grow. This was their blueprint for taking control.
And that blueprint, it really stands on 3 main pillars. See, while pretty much everyone else was outsourcing parts left and right, Tesla made a wild decision. They decided they had to own and master the most important stuff themselves. We're talking the battery, the software that's the brains of the car, and even the charging network that keeps it all running.
Yeah, there's a fancy business term for this. It's called vertical integration. But all it really means is that by controlling the whole process, from the tiny cells in the battery to the software updates you get while you sleep, all the way to the plug you put in the wall, Tesla could move at lightning speed. They could innovate and create a user experience that the old school car companies, well, they just couldn't even dream of touching.
And the Model S, that was the proof in the pudding. It was the first time we saw this in action. Suddenly, you had a car that actually got better after you bought it, thanks to over-the-air software updates. That was completely unheard of. And it was only possible because, you guessed it, they controlled the whole ecosystem.
Okay, but look, building a fancy, expensive car for a few people is one thing. Building an affordable car for everyone, that's a whole different beast. In this next phase, this attempt to go mass market, it almost destroyed the company all over again. This was their true trial by fire. When it was time to launch the Model 3, their car for the masses, Tesla didn't just hit a wall. They slammed into it at full speed. The sheer complexity of building that many cars was just overwhelming. The production lines were a mess. Elon Musk famously called it production hell, and that's exactly what it was. It was another desperate, all-out fight just to survive.
So how in the world did they pull themselves out of that mess? Well, they leaned on a core part of their company DNA, something called first principles thinking. So instead of just looking at how other people build factories and saying, okay, I guess that's how it's done, they questioned everything. They broke down every single problem to its most basic fundamental truths, down to the physics of it, and then built new solutions from scratch.
And that right there was the key difference. A traditional car company, one that's locked into processes from the 1980s, would have been way too slow. They would have been stuck. But Tesla's ability to iterate, to change things super fast, to literally build and tear down and rebuild parts of the factory on the fly, that's what saved their skin.
So, having somehow survived the inferno of production hell, Tesla was finally ready. They were ready to execute the final, most ambitious part of their master plan, going for true, massive, global scale. This was the end game.
And the solution to that problem of scale? It was just as audacious as everything else they'd done. Gigafactories. And you got to understand, these aren't just normal factories. They're these enormous, super automated machines that build the machine. They were designed from the ground up to churn out batteries and cars on a scale nobody had ever seen before. But it wasn't just about manufacturing might. At the same time, they had this other incredible asset, the power of their brand. See, Tesla was never just selling a car. They were selling a mission, an idea, to speed up the world's shift to sustainable energy. And that powerful idea, it turned regular customers into passionate believers, into advocates. It created this built-in marketing army that no amount of money could ever buy.
So let's bring it all the way back to that question we started with. How did they actually manage to rewrite the rules? Well, it's simple, really. They didn't just play the game better, they threw out the old rulebook and wrote a completely new one.
And it really all comes down to this head-to-head comparison. The old way, you scale from cheap cars up to expensive ones. The Tesla way, you start at the top and build your brand first. The old way, outsource everything. The Tesla way, vertically integrate and control your destiny. Old school innovation was slow, tiny incremental steps. Tesla's was fast, radical, and based on first principles. And finally, where old school branding was all about slick marketing campaigns, for Tesla, it was about having a real driving mission.
So in the end, Tesla's incredible rise from the absolute brink of death wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It was the direct result of a deliberate, incredibly risky, but ultimately brilliantly executed blueprint that they had been planning for years.
What they really did was prove that it's possible, that one determined company can take on even the biggest, most established players and win. And that leaves us with one last really interesting question to think about. Now that this blueprint for a total industry rebellion is out there,